Okay, so I've engineered a methodose that hopefully will be found creditable to show. I'll put it in the notes so that it can be more clear what this new avenue on this subject matter is showing. So we're going to attribute to. So this is an old subject matter. People, as I've heard for the longest time, about Jung's Cryptomnesia interpretation of Nietzsche's Zarathustra and his Zarathustra seminars. I'm going to compare Jung's Cryptomnesia thesis to my letheia thesis. But here the thesis applies to Jung himself. I'm saying Jung is the one doing the Cryptomnesia. Cryptomnesia, hidden memory. Cryptoletheia, hidden blotting out or hidden driving into oblivion of something Jung knew. Somehow in the unconscious he blotted it out, which is if we're not to attribute Jung of doing this deliberately and deliberately falsifying his account. So we have two interpretations. We have Jung's interpretation and we have Leo Strauss's interpretation, and we're going to compare them. They have some points of agreement and some points of disagreement. So far as I know, this is a comparison that has never been made before. So I think it's useful to look at the notes to see where to go to all the primary materials. And I don't claim to, in other words, I just claim to give them as the roughest sketch and only to sort of indicate what the interest in the subject matter is, but not to at all give a really thoroughgoing and the best possible a drawing of the thing. We're only sort of just squinting down at all these issues in a way, without quite knowing which are the more primary issues, and sometimes without being able to distinguish the more fantastical from the more powerful points. So let's look at the main issue. The thing that's always put forward is Jung's version that he talked to Elizabeth Nietszche, Nietzsche's sister, and he confirmed that this guy, I think he's only known to this guy Kerner. He's like known for almost nothing, but has written a few children's some children's literature. Who was coming out of the 18th century, and he's not particularly important except that I think, actually I'll just add my view in the light of Strauss's evidence that Nietzsche must have simply just deliberately copied what was in that child's book, thinking it doesn't matter. It's just it's not like he's plagiarizing per se. He's just taking some of the language, and in a way it furnishes a really marvelous version of Leo Strauss's esoteric writing, because it's a very political issue the way Strauss reads it. But let's look at the way Jung reads it first. Jung says this is Nietzsche didn't know that he was lifting this issue of the volcano and Zarathustra flying up and going down into the volcano, and especially in connection with the rabbit hunt stuff. In the Kerner book, it says something like 4 captains come ashore accompanied by somebody else. But in Nietzsche's version, which is crucial for Strauss's interpretation, the captain remains and doesn't come ashore. And yeah, Jung one wanting to read the whole episode as having contact with the unconscious through the Cryptomnesia. He says he says he says Nietzsche couldn't possibly have deliberately plagiarized this, but it turns out that it's obvious that he did, and moreover, the obviousness of it is something Nietzsche wants us to see, is deliberate, because he's pointing to this esoteric thing. I mean, Strauss doesn't say all this, but once we see Strauss's version, then we see that. It follows from that as corollary of that view, or I guess if you like, it's an inference that we draw from certain things we learned from that view. But I think it's almost should be stronger than that. Okay, so let's look at, and then there's this issue of the two different interpretations of the Feuerhund, which is sort of a hellhound in the classical Greek sense, the Cerberus, and that's the right pronunciation. What Strauss says is, this story is obviously Nietzsche's alluding to Heinrich Heine's Die Götter im Exil of 1856, The Gods in Exile. And here this Jupiter is moored out, so we're out on this isle, and there's a volcano, and there's a rabbit hunt, and so on. So it's obvious reference to this, and the reason is because Nietzsche, referencing the Franco-Prussian War and analogizing it to the rabbit hunt as a mere nothing, says that the captain has remained and not gone rabbit hunting, and the captain is Bismarck. So they, in the 1830s, so before this stuff, Heinrich Heine had written for the Allgemeine Zeitung, which is, it wasn't the, not the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, but its predecessor, in the 1830s as a Paris correspondent. Numerous articles, which was, how does it called, something like, it's translated something like French conditions or something, but it's more like this, the state of things, and it's more like France is in this state, meaning like France is in a mess or in chaos or something like that. It's something like Französische Zuständen, something like that, which I think could be given as like France is in chaos even. So Heinrich Heine has been this by pointing to this story, he points to Heinrich Heine, and then he points to this notion of there's a surface phenomenon, the rabbit hunt, but then there's also this Feuerhund, fire-hound, and it's guarding the way to the deeper things, and the deeper thing is the French Revolution and everything Heinrich Heine has been writing about, this claim for egalitarianism, liberalism, and all the French mess, that's menacing that's in a way causing the nihilism. So yeah, Strauss's version is this political complex, but then it points down into the core of what's beyond the hellhound, which usually of course guards Hades, and the entrance to Hades but the entrance to Hades is where all kinds of interesting things are happening, like because Odysseus is talking to Achilles in the underworld, and talking to and trying to talk to Hercules and all these things. It's an interesting place. The interesting things happen to the Suke. Nothing interesting happens, as that William James points out, to the consciousness, as it were. But that's totally a sort of a distraction from what we're talking about. So Strauss interprets Nietzsche in a way I think it links up to Jung in a sense that it's very radical. So he's saying Nietzsche was the first to be as radical as Socrates in a way to allow for the primordial questions to be asked again. So in this way, it's very radical. But how does it's still, even though it's we're going through the French Revolution and the Franco-Prussian War, and that's everything that Strauss is seeing, through his hermeneutic art. Hermeneutic art is nothing esoteric. anyone in the American History Association that admits of the problem of presentism then admits that there has to be some problem how we sort of understand how it was for people who wrote things in the past, and then you need some kind of hermeneutics. You need a hermeneutics when you're just to do regular history. It's universally admitted in some sense. You could call it by different names. Because if you're talking about a time you did, as academic historians invariably do, you're talking about a time that you didn't, not invariably, sometimes you talk about a time you lived through. But usually you're talking about a time you didn't events you didn't participate in, and therefore you might not know really what the spirit of them are, and then therefore you have to find out certain things. And so both Jung and Strauss's interpretations are legitimate, I think, in this sense, because we're trying to find out what, if Nietzsche has a teaching, what is it? And then we have to know what he means. And then he even says, I'm not writing for just anyone, and I'm not easily to be understood. So they're both legitimate, but it seems like Jung's is violently wrong. So now let's look at, although it's also correct in certain ways, but let's look at the one point where it's the most overturned and where the Cryptomnesia comes in. So Jung knew Heine, he knew his works. He mentions him in the Zarathustra seminars, but he mentions him only on the point of saying, Heine is for the paganism and against both Catholicism and Goethe. How should one say that? I want to say Goethe. I was going to say Goethe Schiller, but I should say Goethe Lessing. Those are the old powers that Heinrich Heine had sort of revolted against. Goethe Lessing is Lessing, there's the monotheism. It doesn't matter. Your religion doesn't really matter quite as much, because it's like, it doesn't. Lessing is sort of saying, extending religious tolerance to a deeper level of metaphysics, where he then thereby sort of tarnishes the value of religion by saying it doesn't really matter that Islam says, that the imams say one thing and the Orthodox prelates say another thing, and the Pope says, the Bishop of Rome says something else. We're all the same. It's one God. Lessing. So it's a form of toleration, but it's one that's sort of deadly and corrosive on the basis of the basic battlefield of theology. And then what's Goethe saying? Goethe saying basically sort of, just think of Werther. Think of the Sorrows of Young Werther. What's the thesis of it? It's unlivable that there be a world where class divides lovers. were classified as lovers, because Goethe came from below the highest class. It's more like, you think of Robespierre as being also outside of the aristocracy, but still almost like as close as you could get, right? Even Lenin, Vladimir Lenin is sort of like that, is upper middle class or something. And his brother, I think, also involved in the Soviet revolutionaries. So yeah, you get Jung, to go back to the Crypto Lēthē, you get Jung acting as though he had never read Gods in Exile, which is really Heinrich Heine's most famous short story, and Jung surely knew it. He must have known it. It's impossible that he didn't know it, because he knew Heinrich Heine's work fairly well. He knew what Heinrich Heine was about. He knew about writings about France. He knew it's absolutely impossible to believe he didn't know that. So he's blotting out this story, which is directly a story about a volcano and et cetera, et cetera. Now that I'm saying that, I think it seems sort of silly to accuse Jung of doing that deliberately, because it's so stupid, because people would obviously notice it. Scholars are going to notice that kind of thing. Have they noticed it, though? I don't know. Actually, that's funny. But I would have expected they would have. And Jung would have expected they would have, I think. So he must have blotted it out. His reading is obviously false, but what does it mean? It means Nietzsche knew Heine's version, and he signaled Heine's version, but he also used deliberately, he thought this is just a silly children's story. I'll just use this. It doesn't matter that somebody calls me a plagiarist, who cares? But on the other hand, maybe it's what Strauss says. He deliberately signaled through using that certain thing, such as like in that version it says 4 captains, as I've said, and then in his version the go on a rabbit hunt, but in his the captain stays. And then there's sort of a juxtaposition which shows you what he's emphasizing. He's emphasizing the fact that the captain stayed and didn't go on the rabbit hunt or to participate in or concern himself with 1870. He was rather much more concerned with the culture comp and all these larger questions. Which was, this struggle was ongoing for a lot of years for Bismarck. Which is really, by the way, not so much a struggle with the Catholics. It was much more a struggle with the Protestant liberals, because the liberal professors, most of all, opposed the Catholics, because they wanted to introduce the so-called wertfreie Wissenschaft version, the value-free sciences, which meant you can't have a Catholic supervision of the schooling, because that's a value-laden atmosphere. They wanted something more like, Auguste Comte, positivism of some kind. So let's look at the Feuerhund just for a second. What's the Feuerhund in Jung? It's or the Feuerhund, the hellhound. It's the it's the guardian of the archetypes in a way. It's a guardian of the collective unconscious and the archetypes and the deep unconscious, and moreover, he's reading this as involved in the Cryptomnesia, so somehow unconsciousness is part of, according to Jung's reading, part of the whole thing. So that's obviously, again, it's partially wrong. Nietzsche wasn't unconscious of what he was doing, but on the other hand, when Jung points to his version of the archetypes in the depths of the unconscious, this is very similar to Strauss's reading, insofar as Strauss's reading Nietzsche as being rather like Socrates in shaking everything to the most radical core and allowing. So there's an issue. It's sort of like, I guess I'll wrap it up this way. It's like, so what Strauss says is for us ordinary ones, the best thing we could do is compare two of the great mountain peaks one to the other, because they say they're different. And so we could compare Jung to Strauss, and then we could ask, how are they saying, different things? And then just as we could compare Aristotle to Thomas or something like that. And I think I probably left out some things they wanted to touch on, but let's, yes, it's primary joy to open up a new vague, and let's allow it to have whatever promises it's meant to keep hidden